There has never been a golden age where all dreams came true, nor will there ever be. And so to imagine that there's no heaven, only earth below, is the greatest of fantasies. It's a pagan dreaminess that the great sages and seers have always said indicates an impoverished state of mind that needs to be overcome. The great illusion, say these sages, is to believe that this passing world is all there is. For by its nature, this world and our life in it will be gone in a flash. As almost everyone exclaims in their later years, where did it all go? It happened so quickly. Why, just yesterday we were doing, and it's gone. Well, the crucial thing I think to know is that another world calls to us. A more solid reality is calling to us. A more solid reality that is deeper and greater than this shadowy existence that's passing away. And our response to this call, this actually is our one and only true hope, since all other hopes inevitably will be dashed. So to make sense of this vale of tears, this place of heartbreak and sorrow, our great mission is to cultivate a deeper spiritual perspective upon it all. Armed then in this way, we're then able to look at everything from a higher vantage point, like with an eagle-like vision. Now, ironically, such a level of perception arising from the transcendent realm has the effect of heightening the value of this passing world, which is because life, seen from this higher perspective, is now seen to be a great pilgrimage towards a distant shore. Life itself is understood as a great launching pad towards an eventual great arrival, a climactic homecoming. The point of this life, in other words, is to prepare us for heaven. Life in these terms is a movement towards a wonder-filled destiny instead of a disintegration into nothingness. Thus, instead of the all too common collapse of belief into a sort of sneering cynicism and suspiciousness, a spirit of hopefulness and expectancy can take over. Freed from unbelief, life can become a journey towards transcendence and towards transfiguration. What it therefore comes down to is this, that within every human being, there's a battle to be fought between the attainment of hopefulness based on transcendence against the collapse into a state of unbelief. Which means then that I must never give up the search for truth. And indeed, I need to expect that truth can be found. My point here is to emphasize an attitude of expectancy starkly at odds with the spirit of postmodernism, the spirit of the age, where truth is forever regarded as an impossibility. When the search for truth is abandoned, says University of Toronto professor Jordan Peterson, all that's left is some kind of power struggle. That's all that's left. A power struggle between the haves and the have-nots. Because of widespread unbelief, not a few have been reduced to regarding everything they see as a power struggle. That's exclusively what it's all about. In this age of unbelief, where there's no world of objective meaning and truth, the tragic consequence is a loss of meaning. And then we indeed are lost in a lost world. Lost in a meaningless world, we then become vulnerable to politicians whose specific aim is to stir up resentment against any perceived power brokers. Thus, an array of sophist spin masters take the stage to offer the message that if you have, and I do not, well, that's your fault, not mine. I'm not responsible, you are. And on it goes. The shrill, ear-splitting cry of the leftists is that equality should be forced upon us all. Equal outcomes, it is thought, should be guaranteed for all. University and colleges, says Peterson, are largely controlled now by postmodernists and neo-Marxists actively agitating to producing people who believe that all inequality is due to oppression and power. Though in the last century, millions of bodies washed up on the shores because of this deadly spirit of socialism, it has reared its ugly head yet again. So once again, the effort is now to tear down, not to build up. There's a battle cry to tear down, that is to deconstruct. And it's such a long way from the noble search for truth and for beauty and for goodness. On the deconstruction hit list are these things. 1, religion. 2, constitutional democracy. 3, the rule of law. 4, fine art. 5, the ideal of economic progress. And 6, science and its standards of objectivity. And that list could go on and on. And yet, we've seen all of this before. This nihilism was on display in 500 years before the birth of Christ in the city of Athens, Greece. It appeared in the cast of mind of the sophist Gorgias of Leontina. Gorgias was a thoroughgoing skeptic. He was supremely suspicious, and he had 3 gloomy points to make. These were, first of all, 1, nothing exists. Secondly, he said, if anything existed, if anything existed, it could not be known. And then thirdly, if anything were known, well, it couldn't be communicated anyway. So, like, on all these points, he's skeptical. His depressing refrain amounts to this point, that there's nothing you can know, and there is nothing you can trust. So Gorgias is a relativizer. For him, as for the postmodernists today, there's no solid reality. Truth is entirely elusive. Truth is always sliding away. We cannot know truth, they say, because after all, we are what? 1, we are trapped in our own evolutionary determined brains. Secondly, we are trapped in our own cultural understandings. Thirdly, we are trapped, again, we can't know the truth because we're trapped in our own specific histories. And fourthly, we can't know the truth because we are trapped in our own reactionary educations. We are stuck because of all of these various conditionings. We cannot get past them. We cannot therefore break through to the other side. Truth is not possible. Well, is this kind of thinking, this postmodernist nihilism, a threat? Well, yes, I think indeed it is, and I fear for my granddaughter's future. My granddaughter, as of the other day, is 6 weeks old. I fear for her future if this kind of thinking continues to hold sway in our culture. For if she, like too many others, does not expect to find truth to build her life upon, what instead will her focus be? Will she be like, as it seems so many, who nurse a grievance of some kind for all of their days? Well, my hope is that my granddaughter will grow up filled to the brim with enchanting stories, like I would like to read to her, I will, the tales of Narnia, that will direct her towards the vision of transcendence for truth and beauty and goodness. Bereft of that, however, my fear is that if she doesn't have that background, that she'll be a likely candidate for cynicism and become the worst of all possible sights. The worst of all possible sights, a postmodernist teenager that is open to everything, believing nothing. Like open, tolerant of everything, but believing nothing. My prayer is never to behold the wretched sight of a blood relative open to everything, believing nothing. Now, Dr. Jordan Peterson has recently confessed that it was a mistake of his not to have sent his children to church. Like so many, he had dreamily wanted his children to make up their minds for themselves, which amounted then to his children having received no instruction or guidance in religious matters. And the result, says Peterson regretfully, is that they missed, and I quote, they missed a hell of a lot. Peterson's effort now, however, bless him, is to encourage what he neglected before. His concern now is to inspire into being the well-developed individual, like in a way, like the person in full. Such a person in full, he says, is an antidote to all forms of tyranny. And the chief characteristic, he says, of a well-developed individual is that he takes responsibility for his life. You know, like, I'm not a victim, I take responsibility for my life. Now, such a one, interestingly, on his way to fullness, is described in the New Testament. He's a scribe who overheard a conversation that was going on between Jesus Christ and some others. Upon hearing Jesus and the others reasoning together, this scribe was impressed and then asked Jesus an earnest question. He said to him in Mark chapter 12, what's the first commandment of all? Like, what's the first commandment? And I think about this for a moment. This is a really astonishing question. For it's the opposite of the sort of questions you hear today. For example, 1, how can I get what I want? And 2, how can I get what I'm entitled to? No, here's the exact opposite of that. What is the first commandment of all? In other words, in an entirely different spirit, in an open, receptive spirit, the scribe is asking, what is it that is required of me? Put in other words, what standards should I be living by? Or, in other words yet, what divine imperative needs to be there at the heart of my life and being? Or, finally, what is the greatest commandment to which my life should conform? Well, Jesus answered him and said, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. And you know the scribe's response? He responded with wholehearted agreement that this was the way to go. So Jesus, commending the scribe's receptivity, offered the encouragement, sir, thou art not far from the kingdom of God. You are not far from the kingdom of God. Christ had apparently observed 2 of the scribe's essential faculties totally on fire. There was, on the one hand, his capacity for reason. This was on fire. And secondly, his capacity to be receptive. This too was lit on fire. Philosopher Joseph Pieper has written that in order for there to be a true knowing, a full apprehension of the truth, that both reason, in Latin ratio, like discursive reason, both reason and intuition, in Latin intellectus, need to combine. Both reason and intuition need to combine. For example, if reason is overemphasized, if there's a lopsided focus on reason alone to the exclusion of intuition, and by intuition here, I'm defining intuition as a purely receptive level of seeing. If reason's overemphasized to the exclusion of this intuitive, pure, receptive level of seeing, you could have the case of a kind of a spiritual imperviousness, like all head, no heart. It's the hard quality, says Pieper, of not being able to receive. It's like a stoniness of heart, all head, but the heart is blocked. And it's therefore the case that reason alone will never take us into the kingdom of God. Rather, it must be combined with a total openness of heart. Now, when that happens, when the inner faculties, both reason and intuition, are set aflame and combined, the result, says Pieper, is the highest fulfillment of what it is to be human. And so it is that when you have both reason and intuition, you need both for there to be true knowing and true fulfillment. And if this possibility of true knowing and true fulfillment is to be there, what the scribe was beginning to experience, well, since that's the case, when these two combine, this exists as the alternative to the postmodernist nihilistic impulse of being open to everything, believing nothing.